Hey everyone, my name is Terrell, and today we're going to be taking a look at the bane of everyone who likes to go fast, the Death Piston. At a moderate 50 capacity cost, the Death Piston is the only trap at launch in Meet Your Maker that activates on a recurring timer rather than when triggered by the raider. It repeatedly extends and retracts over a 1-block space, and it does require a full block of clearance that does not intersect with other traps or geometry. This is identical in range to the much cheaper Impaler and shares the same physical constraints. It operates in a 5-phase cycle, preparing, extending, extended, retracting, and resetting. The preparing phase lasts about 1 second, and the extending phase takes about a quarter of a second. The default extended phase lasts again about a quarter of a second, and the retracting phase is a tiny bit slower at about a third of a second, followed by the reset phase at about half a second. All told, the default cycle time of the Death Piston clocks in at around 2 1/3 seconds. Of these phases, by default the extending, extended, and retracting phases are all lethal to any raider that comes in contact with the end of the piston only. The piston, of course, makes a significant amount of noise during all of its phases except for the resetting phase, which makes it extremely loud and noticeable to any raider who's playing with the sound on. Now, interestingly, while shooting a Death Piston with the Volt Lancer during the preparing or resetting phase, that is while the piston itself is fully retracted, will behave normally as you'd expect. So like I can shoot the trap over there, my bolt sticks in the trap, and I can go get the bolt. And I can do the same thing over here. I was too close and it picked the bolt up immediately, but yeah, I can shoot that trap, the bolt stays there, and I can go pick it up if I shoot the trap while the thing is fully retracted. However, if I attempt to shoot the Death Piston while it's in one of these extending, extended, or retracting phases, the bolt ricochets, and it ricochets more or less randomly with a very short radius. So that is somewhat difficult for a builder to control, but if you use it carefully, it is entirely possible to cause the raider's shots to ricochet in unanticipated and very dangerous for the raider directions. So, for instance, if that was a corrosive cube on that side over there, the bolt would have fallen down into the corrosive cube. I'd make that a couple of blocks deep so that I can't pick it up with the magnetic link mod that I've got on my suit. That would operate as a pretty effective bolt trap, especially if it's even deeper than that, say 3 blocks deep. So that makes the bolts much more difficult to get back if I shoot the piston while it's extended. Now if I'm going up a hill and try and shoot a piston that's at the top of the hill, and my bolt goes ricocheting off into a corrosive cube on the side, that might just mean that I can't get that bolt back. At least not until I've dealt with the entirety of that room in order to make it safe enough for me to try and take my time to get the bolt back, right? So you can make use of that ricochet as a builder if you are very careful about it. It's very finicky to pull off. Now, Death Piston mods are quite varied and useful, if mechanically quite simple on an individual level. First off, we'll take a look at Burning Piston here, which makes the piston kill raiders who touch the sides of the piston instead of just the tip. The entirety of the model of the piston is instantly lethal to any raider that touches it. This is the premier anti-speedrunner mod, and it'll serve you really well in slowing down people that are trying to do their best impersonation of Sonic. Please note that unlike a firing incinerator, though, this mod poses no danger whatsoever to a melee raider. They'll still break it with no issues. A sword will still break this piston, even with a lunge, and it will not damage or kill the raider in any way. The Blockade mod makes the piston stay in its extended state for about 2 1/4 seconds. This is best combined with an incinerator trap or the Burning Piston mod to provide some sort of threat to the raider, because a temporary blockade isn't really all that threatening to the raider under normal circumstances, and other traps or guards will just simply destroy the trap. So the extended trap needs to be very carefully managed, and preferably you want to combo this with the Burning Piston, like I said, because just by itself it's not going to do a whole lot for you except allow incinerators to fire through that extended piston. The Unstable mod is very useful. This randomizes the duration of the resetting phase specifically. This causes the piston to rapidly become out of sync with all other pistons on the map, both pistons with this mod and without this mod. Based on my observations and rough testing, the duration of the reset phase seems to be randomized from a range from as low as a quarter of a second or so, all the way up to a full 3 seconds, averaging just over 1.5 seconds. So the piston is a lot less consistent and extends a lot less frequently, but it does, it's out of sync with other pistons, which helps make it a much more effective blockade to a fast speedrunner. Like all of the other second wave mods for flat surface traps, the second wave mod makes the trap invisible and invulnerable until the raider grabs the gen mat, after which the trap will undergo a roughly 4-second arming phase before beginning into its preparation phase and starting to go through its normal extend and retract cycle. So let's take a look at the use cases of this thing. Now by itself, the Death Piston is basically just a less sneaky, more expensive impaler. Now, in the name of both efficiency and effectiveness, therefore, you want to use these in combination with other traps, but the only obvious trap that's usable with this thing is the incinerator because it fires through the extended piston, right? Everything else will cause friendly fire. That leads to a lot of builders always using incinerators and death pistons together, and often only in that pairing. I mean, how many times have each of us been down through that one-by-one hallway with an incinerator at the end and 3 death pistons in front of it? And all of us have seen that, right? So even though that's a strong combination that will slow down speedrunners and can therefore cause them to be caught by pressure from behind, in my opinion, using them only in that way is a significant mistake, because both of these traps, both the incinerator and the death piston, bring a lot more to the table in other cases as well. Now, given an opportunity, a careful raider will almost always destroy a death piston. I mean, why not, right? They're loud, they're obnoxious, they might be dangerous if you mess up or get pulled out of position by a grappling hook or something else. However, even careful raiders often won't use ammo to destroy a death piston in some circumstances, because there's just no point. So looking at this case here, I can see there's a bunch of corrosive cubes around, right? And I know my ammo is going to ricochet off this thing if I shoot it. So I don't necessarily want to shoot it. That's just risking my ammo. It might go off somewhere difficult. If I miss the timing, it might fly off into the distance. I just don't want to risk it. So I'm going to use my sword to destroy this thing, right? But that can pull me out of position too. So a careful builder can actually exploit this desire to use the sword instead of ammo to destroy a piston by, forcing the raider out of position. So for instance here, if I go up to destroy this with my sword, then I am in significant danger of getting spiked by a hidden impaler, or I could have bombs dropped on me by a trap from above, or any number of other dangers here. Because I don't want to use ammo in order to destroy that piston, knowing that it might go flying off somewhere I can't get it back easily. Now, as you might have noticed throughout this video, death pistons are really quite loud. Using an inaccessible death piston somewhere near a pathway, even if it's outside that path entirely, and might not even be accessible by the raider, can be a great way of drawing the raider's attention to that direction. That can open them up for some pretty sneaky trap combinations. Since you can't control the piston's timing, it can be hard to mask trap activation sounds with the pistons, but you can just make a lot of complicated noise with these pistons, especially with the unstable mod. You can put a couple of them in there just to act as noisemakers, and in conjunction with attachments, the death pistons can do a reasonably good job of masking trap activation noises. Just be careful not to overdo it. The death pistons and the attachments, especially the loud mechanical moving attachments, can cause FPS issues for raiders, which will in turn lead to fewer accolades for your outpost. Just don't be a pain in the neck. Don't be annoying with it. Another odd use case of these Blockade Pistons is actually with the new Relentless mod for the bolt shot trap. Even though the piston will be destroyed by the bolts, normally with a piston that has Blockade on it, the bolt shot trap, all of their bolts would be blocked by the piston, right? You can see that there. All those bolts go flying off the piston, and they don't really do much of anything after that. The new Relentless mod turns that on its head because the bolts are still lethal. The first bolt will, of course, destroy the piston and get reflected off the piston and, fall to the ground, but the subsequent bolts will come right on through, and due to the debris of the piston and the visual obstruction of the piston itself, it's very difficult to see what's coming and what time it's going to arrive. That can make preparing a raider's defenses quite difficult. Another odd use case that might come up is that death pistons can actually do things like punt bombs from these bomb traps. It doesn't seem to give them a huge amount of velocity, but they can in fact interact with the bombs and will either block them if the piston is already extended, or push them around if the bomb is already there before the piston extends. So this is kind of imprecise and not really all that useful because it's so unreliable, Even the warmongers are more reliable in my opinion, but in general, this is a possibility. If you manage to make it work, please send me a replay of it. I really want to see that in action. Death Pistons can often be at their most powerful when you don't line an entire hallway with them. Efficiency's the name of the game here, right? In a 1x1 hallway, 2 of these Death Pistons modded with the front one having Blockade and Unstable and the second one having Blockade and Burning Piston is going to cover that incinerator at the back very effectively, and I don't need more pistons, right? Those pistons come in at 50 cost each, and you're probably going to want to mod them, right? But these 2 pistons that are also just modded with 2 mods each, for the most part, cover that incinerator pretty effectively, right? There's a few gaps here and there, but a speedrunner isn't really going to have the opportunity to notice those gaps most of the time before they either get mashed by a piston, shot by the incinerator, or rub their face up against the burning piston and incinerator and die. Or somehow manage to break their way through, you know. A lot of speedrunners are not going to try and push their face all the way through this because they know that's death, right? So they'll take a few seconds and try and dismantle the trap combination, in which case it has done its job already. Now, when used this way, this piston combination is actually probably more effective at slowing down speedrunners than lining the entire hallway with pistons, because it's less likely to draw a grenade or a shield or other equipment usage out of the raider. So you are actually more likely to catch a speedrunning raider and kill them with something like these 2 pistons than you are if you line the entire hallway with pistons. Also, never underestimate a single Death Piston with the Burning Piston mod hidden around a blind corner. While a careful raider is going to hear it coming and destroy it effortlessly, speedrunners often won't hear it coming amidst all of the chaos that tends to go on in their wake. So if you have a bunch of other traps and bomb traps and guards and chasing and everything else going on behind the raider, sometimes they won't hear this piston going off in the distance and they won't know where to expect it. That's when the piston springs out from a blind corner and catches you unaware. Finally, you can do some really nasty stuff if you practice speedrunning your own map. If you know roughly how long it takes the raider to get from point A to point B, between 2 specific points through a narrow hallway or something, and you have a Death Piston with Blockade at the first point, and you can slow down a speedrunner to a tempo that puts them in sync with a Death Piston hidden around a nearby blind corner. And this can make Death Pistons an incredible menace to speedrunners if you do it right, because there really is no good counter to this strategy except to slow down or know where the piston is and pre-shield it. So for best results, couple this with traps or guards that threaten to kill the speedrunner if they don't keep moving, but in this case here I've got a front piston, and I know roughly how long it takes me to get through this hallway here, so if I come through here, I'm going to try and get past this, and I'm going to get mashed by a piston around a blind corner every single time I go through there, because this piston is synced with those other pistons out there. So if I try this again, with less hesitation this time, and go even faster, I'm going to still get mashed by that piston instead. Putting 2 pistons around blind corners will often catch raiders unaware in a case even when 1 blind piston wouldn't. Anyway, that's all I've got for today. Next time we'll take a look at a trap that spends its life pretending to be a guard, the Plasma Sentinel trap. Hope you have a great day, and I hope we'll see you then.